The world was water and thunder. The RHIB carved a thin wound through the Black Sea, its hull rising and falling in rhythm with the storm's breath. Every wave broke against it like the slow pulse of some vast animal. Brooke crouched near the bow, her gloved hand gripping the wet railing, her body absorbing each shudder as rain slicked across her visor. The air was cold and salted, raw enough to sting her lungs. Overhead, a single line of lightning slashed the horizon, just long enough to show the cliff they were headed toward, a vertical wall of basalt that swallowed the ocean whole. No one spoke. They didn't need to. A hand signal from the coxswain was all it took to prepare for insertion. 6 SEALs, blacked out under the weather, began the final checks with machine-like ritual. Magazines clicked into rifles. Ropes were coiled and checked for tension. The breaching packs glinted faintly with seawater, steel buckles dulled by corrosion and habit. Brooke watched the others work through the mist and darkness, the kind of silence only earned through long repetition. When language becomes a liability, every movement was a signal, a nod for ready, 2 fingers for confirmation, a clenched fist for final prep. The fortress waited ahead, half built into the rock, half suspended above the tide. Its outlines appeared only when lightning crawled across the sky gun turrets frozen mid-turn, radar dishes still and dripping, stone terraces clinging to the cliff like barnacles. The sight made her chest tighten, not with fear but focus. She could almost feel the structure breathing with the sea, as if both were part of the same living system. Man-made, she thought, but claimed by something older. Brooke blinked moisture off her visor and checked her wrist gauge. Time to climb 03:47 hours. The tide would turn by 05:20. That was their window, 1 hour and 33 minutes before the ocean reclaimed every inch of the base. She felt the weight of that knowledge the way she felt her gear pressing down, a steady reminder of time as gravity, time as a tide. The RHIB slowed, motor throttled down to a low growl. Thunder rolled, and for an instant, the sound masked their approach perfectly. The pilot's hand rose. Go. Brooke swung her legs over the edge and dropped into the surf. The cold punched through the neoprene, flooding her joints and spine with an ache that bit deeper than pain. She surfaced, rifle raised, boots finding the submerged rocks that led to the cliff's base. The others followed, black shapes vanishing into the foam. At the base of the cliff, the world shrank to darkness and noise, water exploding against rock, wind clawing at fabric, the ceaseless crash that buried every breath. Brooke unshouldered her pack and anchored the first piton. Metal struck stone with the muted certainty of practice. The rope line followed, taut as a live wire. Her fingers moved with precision even as the rain thickened. She clipped into the first line, tested the weight, and looked up. The climb stretched into shadow, slick, vertical, merciless. The kind of ascent that punishes thought. Perfect. She preferred it that way. A hand brushed her shoulder. Ramirez, second climber, eyes hidden behind fogged lenses. He gave a thumbs up. She returned the gesture, then pressed her palm against the rock face. It was cold and breathing, with water. Every drop that ran over her glove felt like the planet itself trying to shake her loose. She began the climb. Each movement was deliberate, rehearsed 1,000 times in controlled conditions, but now dictated by the storm's rhythm. Left hand anchor, right foot, push, rope, pull, pause. The ocean's spray carried upward, coating her goggles until the world became a blur of gray and motion. Somewhere above, thunder cracked, deep and round, masking the metallic clink of carabiners. She welcomed it, nature's own suppressor. Below, the RHIB was already gone, ghosting back into the fog. There would be no radio chatter, no light, no second wave. The mission depended on silence and speed, not rescue. Brooke's heart rate remained steady despite the climb. Her training wasn't courage, it was control. She climbed not away from death, but toward it. The knowledge that each move brought her closer to where death waited sharpened her focus. Halfway up, She paused on a narrow outcrop no wider than her boot soles. The sea surged below, glowing faintly under lightning's flash. For a second she saw her reflection in the water, helmet, visor, rope line trailing, an apparition suspended between storm and stone. She breathed out slowly, the sound vanishing into wind. Discipline under constant peril. That was the core of every operation. No speeches, no adrenaline, just execution. She checked her equipment again, fingers tracing each latch, each buckle, every symbol of structure against the chaos pressing in from all sides. The rope was her lifeline, the only thing between her and the black churn below. She tightened it once more. Above her, the fortress loomed closer, its understructure visible now. Steel scaffolds bolted into rock, dripping seawater like blood. The place looked less like a base and more like something grown out of the earth by violence and time. Lights blinked intermittently, swallowed by fog, like eyes that never closed. The enemy was still unaware. They would stay that way until the first breach. She resumed climbing, the rhythm now internal. Her breathing synced to the tide's crash. Every slip was corrected instantly. Every reach was measured by instinct and repetition. Around her, the team moved like extensions of one will, their black forms blending into the cliff, ropes crossing and disappearing. A final bolt of lightning revealed them all, 6 small shapes against the mountain, specks against immensity. Then darkness again, as if the storm had decided to erase the evidence. At last, she reached the halfway ledge, a shallow shelf carved by erosion. Brooke crouched low, anchoring the next line, her boots sliding slightly on algae-slick stone. Rain hammered her helmet, the smell of brine filled her lungs. She looked out over the sea. No horizon. No separation between sky and water, only movement and noise. The tide had risen already, faster than forecast. She keyed her wristcom twice, 2 short pulses, all steady. Responses blinked green across her visor. HUD. The unity of repetition, the silence of understanding. She leaned back against the cliff, just for a moment, letting the storm wash over her. The rope creaked. The thunder rolled again, masking even the ocean's voice for a heartbeat. She smiled faintly behind her mask. The fortress was still ahead, unreachable, yet inevitable. The rope in her hands was the only order left in a world made of water and noise. The tide was time, and it was coming. Brooke looked up, eyes tracing the black outline of the cliff toward the faint red glimmer of the fortress lights. Every second mattered. Every move had to land. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper carried away by the wind. Climb, and the team ascended into the storm. The storm had matured into a living thing, a beast that chewed at the cliff and spat salt back into their faces. Brooke felt it through her fingertips as she climbed the rock, shivering beneath her gloves, the lines humming with strain. Rain drummed against her helmet like 100 small impacts, and the ropes that had once felt solid now trembled with water weight. Above, the world was nothing but gray movement, a wall of mist and thunder. Below, the ocean foamed and heaved, white bursts flickering through darkness like veins of fire. Each handhold was a negotiation. Each bootstep was an argument with gravity. The basalt slicked beneath her soles, thin streams of seawater tracing down her sleeves. Her gloves squelched when she adjusted her grip. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, a slow burn against cold numbness. She didn't need to look down to sense the drop. The sound of the sea had changed, lower, heavier. The tide had risen. The wind shredded their comms first. Static crackled into her ear, then vanished altogether. The next thing to go was their visibility. Mist rolled upward from the waves, wrapping the cliff in vapor so dense that the seals became shadows connected only by rope tension and faith. Brooke tapped her wrist gauge, checked the barometric pressure, then glanced up. Somewhere above her, Ramirez climbed steadily, a blur of black, backlit by lightning. Below, Daniel's line jerked once, then steadied, An all-good tug. They didn't need voices. Rope was language enough. Brooke braced herself against an outcrop, unclipped one arm, and reset a piton. The hammering was lost to the wind, but she felt each vibration through her wrist, counting the strikes. Every motion had to be mechanical, unthinking. Mistakes lived in hesitation. She anchored the line, pulled twice, then resumed the climb. Rain sluiced over her face, running down her collar, pooling between armor plates. It was as if the storm was trying to peel them away layer by layer, stripping them back to raw nerve and instinct. Her visor blurred, so she lifted it for clearer sight. The cold hit her directly, sharp and intimate. Lightning split the horizon. For a heartbeat, she saw the fortress. Black angles carved into the cliff's crest, light blinking through storm haze like a warning. She also saw the faint shimmer of metallic movement near one of the upper terraces. Her chest tightened. The hum reached her seconds later. Faint at first, then distinct. The low, mechanical purr of a small surveillance drone cutting through rain. She froze. The others did too, sensing it through the stillness of the ropes. The drone's red sensor light blinked intermittently through the mist, sweeping the cliff's face. Brooke pressed her shoulder tight to the stone, eyes following the pattern. It was hunting with sound as much as sight, its sensors distorted by the static storm, but not blind enough. The hum grew louder, closer. Brooke reached across her chest for her rifle, slow, deliberate, the motion hindered by the harness straps. The weapon was soaked, water streamed from the barrel. She shifted her weight, finding one point of balance against the rock, and steadied her breathing. The drone's red eye appeared again, hovering just meters away, backlit by lightning. A single suppressed shot cracked, soft, but deadly precise. The drone jerked, spun, and tumbled backward into the void. For a second, nothing but the sound of wind filled the gap it left. Then came the reaction. Distant shouts from above, muffled but unmistakable. The fortress was awake. "Go," she mouthed. No sound, but her hand gesture was clear. The team accelerated. The climb turned violent. Wind battered them from below. Rain blasted sideways. Bullets whined past, pinging off the cliff, enemy sentries firing blindly into the storm. Every ricochet sparked like flint, swallowed instantly by lightning's glare. Brooke felt her rope line twitch twice. Someone hit, or just slipping. She couldn't tell. She anchored hard, weight dropping to stabilize the formation. The rock face was no longer static. It moved under them, small fractures giving way, water loosening the old stone. One of the lower climbers dislodged a chunk the size of a helmet. It spun down into the darkness and was gone. The impact sound never came, only the roar of the sea. Brooke climbed faster, her breath coming in harsh bursts through clenched teeth. Each meter upward demanded more from her shoulders, more from her grip. The rope burned against her palm despite the gloves, fibers soaked and heavy. Her muscles screamed, but she ignored them. She had trained for this kind of silence. Control, she reminded herself. The illusion must hold. Lightning flashed again, this time closer, so bright it left an afterimage. Brooke blinked through it and saw Ramirez 20 feet above her, slipping. His right boot missed its mark. His body lurched away from the wall. Instinct took over. She lunged sideways, slammed her harness line around a rock spur, locked her elbow, and braced. The rope snapped tight, nearly jerking her shoulder from its socket. "Hold," she hissed to herself. The line steadied. Ramirez recovered, re-anchored, and gave 2 hard tugs. Brooke exhaled. The pain was instant, spreading through her arm like fire. She flexed her fingers once, twice, to ensure nothing broke. Below, the others had tightened formation, a human chain suspended against the cliff's skin. A round struck near her knee, chipping rock into her face. She ducked by reflex, grit and rain filling her mouth. The smell of wet stone and ozone merged with gunpowder, metallic, choking. She turned her head, gauging the angles. Enemy shooters were above and left, firing blind through storm glare. Good. She used the next thunderclap as cover, fired 3 quick shots upward, the recoil knocking her off balance momentarily. Her boot slipped. For one breathless instant, the world inverted. The sea above her, the sky below. The rope caught, biting into her harness, wrenching her midair. Her head slammed into the rock, visor cracking down the center. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Then she was back against the stone, body pressed close, gasping. The world shrank again to sensation rain, rope, heartbeat. Everything else dissolved. She touched her cracked visor, blinked through the fissure. The lightning outside became a river of silver through it, distorting the world. The fortress was closer now, its shape emerging clearer, jagged platforms and vents carved into the rock like scars. The gunfire had stopped. The enemy was repositioning, waiting for confirmation of their climb. The ocean below thundered with renewed force. Waves slammed into the cliff so hard that water sprayed nearly halfway up, chilling the air with vapor. It was rising faster than their ascent, time bleeding away, tide as the second enemy. Brooke tightened the rope around her waist and began moving again, each step a battle against weight and exhaustion. The storm had erased horizon and distance. Nothing existed but motion and gravity. Her world reduced to the line in her hands, the tactile pulse of life connecting her to the others. By the time she reached the next ledge, her arms were shaking. She planted both boots, leaned into the wall, and took a long, slow breath. The rain coursed over her helmet, pooling in her collar. She could taste iron in the air. Below her, the team's shapes were moving shadows in the lightning flicker. The drone was gone. The gunfire had stopped, but the fortress knew they were here. Brooke checked her watch. 04:21. Less than an hour before the tide cut them off completely. The wind screamed against the cliff as if to warn them back, but the ropes pulled tight once more. The climb continued. Even perfect training, Brooke thought, is just borrowed time. The mountain lets you live until it decides otherwise. She tightened her grip on the rope and climbed higher, into the storm's open mouth. The ledge was barely a breath of safety, a narrow seam carved into the cliff face where 6 bodies could cling and no more. The rain came sideways, driven by wind so fierce it flattened the sea below into white noise. Brooke pressed herself against the wall, chest heaving, rope thrumming with vibration. Her gloves were slick with seawater, her arms trembling not from fear but fatigue drawn taut. They had climbed for nearly an hour inside the storm, and still the fortress hung above like a predator, its lower platforms spitting water and smoke into the void. She crouched low, boots scraping over the wet stone, scanning the cliffside. The fortress base jutted overhead, rusted steel panels embedded into basalt, streaked with algae and salt. There, half hidden by shadows and runoff, was the maintenance vent. It was barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through, but it was their entry point. The only blind spot left. "Hold position," she mouthed, but her team already knew. Ramirez was beside her, breathing through his mask, the condensation fogging his lenses. Daniels hung just below the ledge, half suspended, rifle strapped tight to his chest. The others anchored, checked their ropes, and waited for her cue. Communication had boiled down to instinct, shared rhythm in chaos. Brooke opened her breaching kit. Inside, the charges gleamed dull under the flash of lightning, curved slabs of explosive gel shaped for precision. Her hands shook as she peeled the safety tabs, not from panic but from the storm's chill gnawing through muscle and bone. She leaned forward, planting each charge beneath the vent grill, fingers steady despite the gusts. The metal was cold, vibrating faintly under the fortress's machinery above. She counted each placement, 1, 2, 3, 4. Thunder rolled, deep and close, perfect timing. She tapped her timer to sync with it. The team hunkered down, pressing helmets against the cliff. Brooke glanced up once more, gauging the rhythm of the sky. Lightning arced through the cloud line. She triggered the detonation. The blast came not as a roar, but as a silence swallowed by thunder. The shockwave shuddered through the stone, a single violent heartbeat before the sound dissolved into rain. The vent grill tore outward, spinning into the dark. Smoke and mist billowed from the breach, carried sideways by the gale. For a split second, nature and violence were indistinguishable. Thunder, explosion, and wind folding together into one continuous scream. Brooke rose immediately, waved the signal, and climbed. The others followed, boots slamming against slick stone, hands slipping on soaked ropes. They reached the vent mouth, steel edges glowing faintly from heat, and pulled themselves inside one by one. The shift was immediate. The storm outside was replaced by suffocating stillness, air dense with humidity, the metallic taste of recycled oxygen. The tunnel was narrow, carved between layers of steel and rock, illuminated by dim red emergency lights. Water dripped constantly from above, running along pipes and pooling in small, trembling reflections. The sound of the ocean was still there, but muted, a low throb beneath their feet, like the pulse of something ancient. Brooke went first. The passage forced her to crawl on elbows and knees, rifle slung tight across her back. Her gloves squished against puddles. Each movement made the armor plates on her shoulders scrape against the walls. Ahead, a hatchway glowed faintly red. The vent system's main junction. She raised a fist. Halt signal. The team froze. Through the faint hum of machinery came the sound of footsteps, deliberate, uneven. Enemy guards, 2 at least, talking softly in a language the storm couldn't erase. Brooke waited, her breath steady. Timing was everything now. When the thunder returned, it would cover them even here. The floor trembled with the next rumble. She moved. Her boots slammed the hatch open, rifle snapping up before it fully swung. The first guard didn't have time to turn. Suppressed fire cracked 3 times, flashes painting the walls white. The second man stumbled backward, weapon half drawn. Ramirez's shot ended it before he could shout. The noise faded into dripping silence again. Brooke stepped over the bodies, sweeping her muzzle across the corridor. It stretched into a curve, lined with pipes and flickering emergency lights. Steam hissed from ruptured valves, misting the air thick enough to hide movement. The floor slanted slightly. They were still inside the cliff's infrastructure, the lowest tier of the bastion. The team moved like water, soundless and smooth. Every bootstep in the puddles was deliberate, weight distributed to avoid echo. Every trigger pull was a controlled exhale. The rhythm was meditative advance, clear, check, advance. Discipline under constant peril. This was the shape it took. Not speeches or heroism, but silence. The first counterattack came fast. A door ahead burst open, enemy silhouettes framed in red light. Brooke ducked, firing instinctively. Muzzle flashes cut through steam like lightning in miniature. Sparks rained from the ceiling as rounds struck metal overhead. Ramirez went low, firing a burst that tore through the narrow choke point. One of the guards fell backward into the corridor wall, the impact clanging through the structure. Brooke advanced, stepping over the fallen. Left clear, she signaled. The others spread out, 2 covering, 2 moving. The pattern repeated. Perfect, despite exhaustion. The storm outside still echoed through the metal. Faint tremors, deep resonance like a drumbeat. It was the tide, rising against the cliff, hammering the fortress from below. Brooke could feel it in the floor under her boots, the pressure building, the reminder that time wasn't theirs. The sea was coming to reclaim what they had invaded. She pressed onward, deeper into the maintenance artery. The walls began to sweat condensation from the clash of temperatures storm-cold meeting machine heat. Drops fell constantly, hitting armor and gear in steady rhythm, like rain resurrected underground. The air smelled of oil and ozone, thick enough to taste. They reached an intersection. One path led upward toward the inner decks, another toward the radar core. Brooke made the call with a nod, and they veered left. The floor vibrated harder now. Turbines somewhere above were spinning down, either from the breach or defensive lockdown. Her visor, HUD flickered. Water still trapped beneath the crack from earlier. Every blink made the red glow warp into strange shapes, like veins pulsing in the dark. She ignored it, focusing on motion, on control. A new burst of gunfire erupted from a side passage. Bullets tore sparks from the pipes, fragments of metal flying. Brooke ducked, rolled into cover behind a column, feeling heat ripple across her arm. The team responded in sync, two suppressing, two advancing, the formation like a mechanical tide pushing forward. Every second was borrowed balance. Every step, an act of defiance against the elements and the clock. She leaned out, lined her sights, and fired. The echo mingled with the fortress's groan and the thunder outside, indistinguishable from nature's chaos. When the last shot fell silent, only the drip of condensation and their own breathing remained. Brooke reloaded, the click of the magazine sharp and clean. She looked down the corridor, cleared. For now, she allowed herself a single breath of stillness. The air inside the fortress was warmer but heavier, pressing down as though the mountain itself disapproved of their presence. The walls vibrated faintly with the surf's rhythm, a reminder that this place belonged not to men, but to the sea that carved it. Mastery, she thought, was an illusion. Even here, inside steel and fire, the ocean still called the tune. She raised her hand again. Signal forward. The team moved deeper, the red light glinting off their soaked armor like blood in motion. Above and below, thunder continued to roll, not behind them now, but all around, swallowing everything. Their breach had worked. The fortress was awake. The sea was coming. And Brooke, climbing still in spirit though her boots now met steel, knew that victory existed only inside the moments the storm allowed. The fortress was drowning from the inside out. The first surge came through the lower corridors, a sudden, booming roar that shook the steel under their boots. Water burst from the vent tunnels, sweeping across the deck like the breath of a living creature. Brooke turned just in time to see a wall buckle, a sheet of seawater hammering through. The floor vanished beneath it, and the sound swallowed everything. Gunfire, comms, even breath. It was no longer a storm outside. The storm had come in. They were waist deep in seconds. The lights flickered overhead, red to white to nothing. The emergency beacons sputtered, reflections warping across the rising flood. Brooke slammed her hand against a bulkhead to stay upright, her shoulder screaming from the strain. A seal to her left slipped, submerging for a moment before Ramirez yanked him up by the harness. Move. Brooke's voice was swallowed, barely audible over the echoing roar. She waved toward the stairwell, the only path upward still clear, for now. They slogged through knee-high water that rose with every step. The smell was a mix of salt, oil, and metal decay. Sparks hissed from overhead cables, dropping like fireflies into the flood. Each one flared for a heartbeat before dying, tiny flashes swallowed by the tide. The entire structure felt alive, walls groaning, bolts popping, floors flexing under pressure. Then came the enemy. Dark figures appeared through the steam and broken lights, rifles lifted above the waterline, muzzles flashed, turning the corridor into a red-streaked blur. Bullets slapped into the flood with a sound like hammer strikes, spraying arcs of salt water and foam. Brooke ducked, sighted, fired. Her rifle's report was muffled by water and distance, but the effect was clean. One guard dropped, then another. She advanced in measured bursts, her steps heavy and slow, every movement deliberate. The water dragged against her gear, each magazine pouch and holster a new anchor. She could feel the fortress tilting slightly under her, as if the cliff itself were trying to shed this human weight. Discipline was all that kept them from breaking apart. 2 o'clock. Mezzanine. Ramirez signaled, voice tight. Brooke followed his line of sight, a pair of defenders firing from an upper maintenance walkway. She aimed high, but the recoil pushed harder underwater. Her first burst went wide. She exhaled, steadied her stance, fired again between thunderclaps. One target fell backward into the flood, the body vanishing instantly into the dark current. Lightning flickered through the high vents, strobing the entire corridor. For a split second, everything froze. The faces, the water, the sparks. Then it all moved again. A sudden collapse tore open the far wall. A wave poured in, taller than any man, sweeping debris and equipment through like driftwood. Brooke slammed herself against a support column, one arm outstretched to grab Ramirez before the surge tore him away. They clung there together, submerged to their chests as the torrent raged past. When it receded, the corridor was half the size it had been. One of the lower seals didn't surface. Brooke counted heads, jaw clenched. 5 left. No time to look for him. The tide's timer wasn't a number anymore. It was sound. The deep, rhythmic boom of the sea hammering the structure in waves. Every blow threatened to collapse what remained of the stairwell above them. She pointed upward, motioning for ascent. The others followed, rifles up, water sloshing around their chests. They began to climb the flooded stairs, slow, dragging, fighting both the incline and the surge. Each step upward felt like a refusal, a rejection of the sea's demand. The higher they went, the louder the wind howled through broken ducts, blending with the gunfire behind them. Brooke's breath was steady, measured against chaos. Halfway up, Daniel stumbled. Brooke spun, caught him under the arm. Blood mixed with seawater. A shoulder hit, shallow but bleeding fast. She pulled him along, dragging him through the rising flood. Every second mattered. Every handhold was survival. At the landing, the water reached their ribs. The hatch ahead glowed faintly from a floodlight beyond, a small, fragile circle of brightness trembling in the rain. It looked impossibly distant. Gunfire again. The defenders were waiting at the top of the stairwell, silhouetted in that same pale light. Rounds sparked off the rails, pinged into steel. Brooke pushed Daniels down and leaned over him, sighting up through the steam. Her rifle was half flooded, the trigger gritty, but it still fired. 2 shots. 3. Silence. She climbed, slipping once, boots scraping the slick metal steps. Her pulse beat against her throat like a second storm. The tide was coming up the stairwell now, surging faster, the rhythm accelerating. The fortress groaned with every hit, like lungs exhaling for the last time. They reached the hatch. Brooke's gloves slipped on the latch wheel, so she ripped them off and turned it barehanded. Metal bit into her skin, but the mechanism moved. The door swung outward, releasing a gust of wind and rain that hit them like a wall. The storm outside was total. Thunder, mist, and spray folding together into white chaos. The floodlight beyond flickered, its beams slicing through the storm in thin bursts. That fragile glow was the only proof of life left in the structure. Brooke pulled Daniels through first, then Ramirez, then the others. The exterior platform was half submerged. Waves crashed against the steel, spraying water so high it felt like rain from below. The air was alive with noise, rotors faint in the distance, somewhere above the chaos. Extraction was inbound. "Cover positions," she shouted, voice raw, barely heard. She crouched behind a shattered bulkhead, scanning for movement. The enemy was thinning, or drowning. It was hard to tell. Brooke looked back once. Through the open hatch, she could see water boiling up the stairwell, unstoppable, consuming. The floodlight behind them reflected off it, turning the dark water silver for a moment before the bulb burst. Darkness rushed in to fill it. "Time's done," she said softly. A thunderclap rolled overhead, shaking the deck beneath her boots. The rotor noise grew louder, echoing through the fog. She waved the flare beacon, its red light sputtering in the rain. Above, a shadow cut through the mist, the helicopter descending, its downwash merging with the surf. Brooke steadied her breathing. Every action still counted. Every second still demanded precision. Ramirez hoisted Daniels first, the rescue slings spinning wildly in the wind. Brooke held position, firing short bursts into the storm where muzzle flashes flickered, instinctive, methodical, her world reduced to movement and sound. When the cable dropped for her, she clipped in and looked once more at the fortress. The sea had taken most of it. The walls were folding inward, the base bleeding light into the water. It looked less like a building and more like a sinking memory. She rose through the rotor wash, rain pelting her visor, body swaying under the cable's pull. Below her, The tide filled everything, turning the cliff and fortress into one single motion. She could still hear it over the helicopter, the crash and draw, the endless heartbeat of the sea reclaiming its shape. Even at the brink of drowning, order had held. Not strength, not speed, order. Discipline was the only thing that kept them human against the tide. The floodlight flickered one last time, then vanished.